Hey folks, welcome back. Time to talk a little bit more about Doctor Who, the role-playing game. So, the 60th anniversary celebration continues on the BBC. We've had 3 one-hour specials featuring David Tennant, coming back from being the 10th Doctor to the 14th Doctor for a short time. And I just finished watching the last of those 3, The Giggle, which I highly recommend. Neil Patrick Harris turns in an excellent performance. I won't say anything more than that, just give it a watch, it's good fun. And on Christmas Day, they will show the debut of the 15th Doctor, which should be great. So it's a good time to be checking out the franchise if you're new to it. Here in the UK, the iPlayer now has a Whoniverse section, which has everything Doctor Who from every time, anywhere. A lot of it remastered. Some of them, the old black and white ones, have been colorized, and there are more of those planned for the future, apparently. So we've got that to look forward to. And yeah, we've got a new series coming. So every new Doctor has a new personality and sets off on new adventures. So you don't necessarily need to know all the backstory and all the history to just dive right into the new series. And with Russell T Davies back on board as showrunner, I hope things will take a bit of an upward turn in terms of the writing and the excitement and the storylines compared to what we've had recently. But anyway, if you want to get into it via playing the role of the Doctor and his companions around your table, Cubicle 7 is still the place to go for the RPG. Now, we have the second edition out now, and we'll get to that soon enough. But first, I wanted to show the evolution of the first edition. So we saw the 11th Doctor edition of the box set. Of course, there was also a 10th Doctor edition. But when it came to time to do the 12th Doctor, Cubicle 7 kind of redid the basics of the line. So I call this kind of 1.5, not because they changed the rules particularly, but just because they changed the presentation up quite a bit. So we go from the box set to a 256-page hardcover, and we've got kind of the player's handbook and game master's handbook that were soft covers in the box set combined into one volume, along with some additional stuff that was covered in source books before. So you can see we've got Peter Capaldi as Doctor number 12 on the front, looking somewhat grumpy and pensive as per his usual. Now, on the back, it says here, the Doctor Who role-playing game set in the universe of the world's longest-running science fiction show on TV, the BBC's Doctor Who. This new edition of the rulebook, fully updated with imagery from the 12th Doctor's adventures, presents all the rules and background you need to have your own adventures in time and space in a single volume, including a complete set of rules for playing in the game, rules for creating your own characters, gadgets, and more, a guide to creating your own adventures, as well as 2 new adventures, ready-made character sheets for the 12th Doctor and his companions, including Clara Oswald, Danny Pink, Madame Vastra, Jenny, and Strax, rules and background for some of the Doctor's most infamous enemies, including Missy, all new imagery from the 12th Doctor's adventures, and much more besides. Suitable for 2 or more players aged 10 to 2000. Now, one thing to note is that they made a special edition version of this edition of the rulebook as well, which was the 10th and 11th Doctor edition, and that was a limited run. I have a copy of that coming my way, so I will do a comparison, a little bit of a shorter video, hopefully, on that one. Basically, it's the same rules content, but the imagery and the pre-gens are for the 10th and 11th era of the Doctor, so you've got actually more characters in the back to use as pre-gens and stuff like that, so it's pretty cool to have that as well. But yeah, let's get into it. Basically, again, the rules have not changed substantially as far as I know in this edition. They've just made a nicer hardcover presentation. You know, we've got, as you would expect from Cubicle 7, we've got a nice solid binding. This is a used copy, but everything's still held together pretty nicely. And it's not that expensive to find these on eBay or, similar kind of used book websites or Amazon or whatever for a reasonable price. So we get our standard kind of introductory chapter to what's the game, what's Doctor Who, what's role-playing, the basics of how game sessions work, why you use dice, how to use the book, the use of terminology, measurements, and language, and how we have these little boxes here, call-out boxes for details of NPCs and villains. Basically, we get into a nice little bit of background material on key figures in the Doctor's universe. So, Doctor himself, the concept of Time Lords, the TARDIS, his time machine, his companions. So, Doctor's a lonely guy and functions best with companions to keep him kind of somewhat tethered to reality, I suppose, rather than going mad with loneliness. And his many enemies. Here we have some Cybermen. What I like as well is there's a nice example of play, which, it's written fairly naturalistically. It sounds like, relatively realistic people playing. And it goes on for quite a bit. So if you're really new to what a role-playing session should look like, you've got 4 pages of content here to read through that can kind of introduce you to what that feels like around the table, how the exchange between players and game masters go. And if you'll see the note here, you can continue the story by playing the adventure, which is included on page 217. So chapter 2 is old-fashioned heroes from old-fashioned storybooks. So here we get into character creation, basically. And they recommend, the Game Master guide you through the character creation process. So, helping you decide what kind of companions would be suitable and what type of story or campaign is being planned. So you want to make sure that, the type of game that you're playing is going to suit the characters that you want to create, and you can have a discussion about that before you set off and get into the character creation rules themselves. You can play, for example, the Doctor and companions from the show, which they have stats for in the back of the book. You can play the Doctor with new companions, so it could be an established Doctor, but you've replaced the companions with new player characters. There's, of course, a call-out box here talking about the main issue of the Doctor Who game to be sorted out at the beginning, which is, only one person can play the Doctor. Now, with the outcome of the recent specials, maybe that's not true anymore. I'm not sure. I don't want to say any more about that right now. But yeah, there could be potential to play more Time Lords as well if you play in a different period in the Doctor Who timeline. So, before the Time Wars and all that kind of stuff. Before the Doctor was the last of his kind. So there are many ways to play. And they outline a few of those. Another way is to not have a Time Lord at all. You can be members of UNIT or Torchwood, who are human teams that are kind of banding together to stop the threats of aliens or time travelers from elsewhere. And then they give you the basics, of course, of character creation, which we're familiar with from the previous box sets. So your characters will have your attributes, skills, and traits. Attributes are their basic characteristics, like you would find in D&D or similar games. Skills are, driving, hacking, medical skills, all those kind of stuff. And then you have traits, which define specific sort of characteristics of that character that can't be summed up so easily. They have special capabilities in certain circumstances. So the attributes and skills will have numerical ratings, but the traits will have rules associated with them that allow that character to do something special in a certain circumstance. And we'll see that as we get to example characters and stuff. And it's a points-based character generation system, same as before. So you have a certain number of you have 24 character points, in fact, for attributes and traits, and they recommend spending 18 points on attributes and 6 for traits, and you can also get additional character points by taking some bad traits. So in that way, it's similar to something like Hero System / Champions or GURPS, where, if you take a disadvantage, you can sort of buy back some points to get more cool stuff. And that makes your character more interesting to roleplay as well, if you have some downsides, some weaknesses or quirks. Then you can get 18 skill points, and if you have any leftover unspent character points, you can use those to buy skill points as well. And then the standard character starts with 12 story points, and those have a special function in the game that's outlined more later in the book. That's the maximum, basically. And then as you take certain traits, like being a Time Lord or having big powers that really change your character's capability, for the better, you may have to sacrifice some story points. So, you'll have less ability to spend those in key moments to save yourself or others. And then they go through the attributes. And what I like here is they kind of break down each attribute as far as describing what the number means in real terms, in relatable terms. So if awareness 5, you're perceptive, aware of everything going on around you, can read others like a book, gut feelings are rarely wrong. Awareness 6 is the human maximum, incredibly rare. You take in everything around them subconsciously, uncannily good at spotting clues, able to read what people are really intending by fluctuations in their voice or notice the most minuscule details. 7+ is superhuman, so you possess enhanced senses of some kind. So you're possibly an alien or a robot or a cyborg. Typically will only get stats 7 or above. Then we have coordination as well, which is, of course, controlling what your bodies do, more like Dex in other games. Ingenuity is your sort of reasoning ability and general intellectual capacity. And you see generally the Time Lords have very high ingenuity because that's what the Doctor's all about. Presence is how impressive and charismatic you are. Resolve is the character's determination and willpower. Finally, strength is, your physical ability to take or give a punch, lift things, move things about, that sort of stuff. Then it mentions here, of course, for the higher attributes, superhuman and alien attributes that go higher than 6 are handled exactly the same way, but they're not for normal characters. They're reserved for special characters like aliens, villains, Time Lords, etc. These characters are often stronger and more powerful and should only be created under the watchful eye of the game master. So they have, of course, a running character creation example as well, which is nice and helpful. And they mention about underbuying attributes. So, in each stage of the character creation process, you can underbuy to have some spare points for the next step, which is helpful. So, and then we have traits, which are key aspects. There could be good and bad traits. And as I mentioned, the bad traits, of course, give you points back to spend on more skills or attributes or what have you. And there are different levels of traits. There are minor traits that cost 1 character point to purchase. Major traits cost 2, or in the reverse case, if they're bad traits, you gain 1 point. For a minor bad trait, you gain 2 points for a bad major trait. And special traits are the big guns, and they tend to be more expensive, but they also make your character really stand out. So you may want to just clear with your GM that they'll allow certain special traits depending on what the campaign's supposed to be like. It also recommends that the Game Master limits the number of bad traits to 6 points per character, but they also mention that some of the special traits cost so many points that you really have to take some bad traits to even purchase them at all, so keep that in mind. Some traits can be purchased more than once, so you can have 2 phobias, for example, but some traits also oppose each other, so you can't be both brave and cowardly. There are some cases where it will specifically call out, you can't be technically adept and technically inept. You can't be both distinctive and have face in the crowd, which means you blend in really well. And then they have a huge list of traits, split into good traits first, then bad traits, and then special traits. So here we get a big list of traits that we're familiar with from the previous books, but we've got all 12th Doctor era imagery, so lots of Clara around. So we got animal friendship, arrogant, attractive, boffin, all this kind of stuff we've seen before. Brave, charming, empathic, face in the crowd, fast healing, friends, which gets quite a bit of explanation, which is useful because anything that has to do with possible changes to the narrative, like being able to have backup to bring to the game, I think that should be managed carefully by the Game Master, and everybody should understand how that will work in practice. So it's nice to get extra explanation on that. Hotshot, hypnosis. And there's a special version of that one as well, which costs 3 points, and it's kind of, you hypnotize somebody to the point of possessing control over their mind. So a trait to be careful with as a game master. Indomitable, so you're having an iron will, keen senses, being lucky. So if you roll snake eyes on your 2d6, which is normally what you roll, then you get a second chance, and you can re-roll, hoping for something better. But you have to keep the second result. You can also buy a military rank, and by the way, the stars here mean you can buy it more than once, and they give you a little table here on what your rank becomes if you buy multiple levels of the trait. You can be noble, you can be ode of favor. Percussive maintenance means you can make things better quickly by whacking them. Photographic memory, psychic training. Resourceful pockets, that's always a good one. So you can spend a story point to find something that you need, or roll a couple of dice, and if you get a double, then you find something helpful in your pocket. And it might just be a random thing. Could not be necessarily what you were expecting, but something the GM knows you could use creatively in the situation. So that can be kind of fun. Reverse the polarity of the neutron flow. So this is basically a particular outstanding intuitive leap. Once per adventure, if you failed a science or tech roll, you can use this and turn the result into an automatic fantastic success. And the levels of success are explained later. Run for your life. Screamer. These are both good when you're trying to get away from bad things. Sense of direction is also useful for that. Technically adept means you're good at fixing things. Time traveler, again, you can take that more than once to reflect different levels of time travel experience. And then you have tough, so that helps you take punches and stay on your feet. Voice of Authority gives you a bonus to your presence and convince rolls. Now we've got your bad traits. So these are things that have a negative effect on your character in game terms, but they do give you those character points that you can then use to buy other things, additional points in attributes and skills and stuff. So you could have an adversary, could be a minor one or a major one. So a major one would be an adversary that is resourceful and, coming after you with a lot of resources. So like the Daleks or the Cybermen we see down here. You could have amnesia. So, if it's a minor trait, you have a portion of your memory missing. If it's a major bad trait, you don't know who you really are or anything about your past. So that could be interesting to roleplay, but you'll need to work that into the story. Argumentative. So, fight for your position, which can rub people up the wrong way. By the book means that you're basically following correct procedure to the letter. You don't really deviate and break the rules, which can be bad when you need to come up with creative solutions to problems. Clumsy. Code of conduct is kind of similar to by the book, except that this is kind of a self-imposed set of rules or a kind of ethical stance that the character has. As a minor trait, it just means that basically the character should try to do good most of the time, and you can't harm another being unless you absolutely have to. As a major trait, you have to do your best all the time. You never want to commit violence or any of that kind of stuff, but that can be really hard to stick to as a player, so make sure you're kind of aware of that before you take that on. Cowardly means that you're easier to scare, basically, which is something that enemies with the fear factor can inflict on you. You might have a dark secret, something hidden in your closet that come back and bite you. You might have a dependency on something. Maybe you're addicted to blood or alcohol or some other gross thing. You can be distinctive, which means it's difficult for you to do subterfuge type things, intrigue, or disguise yourself. Eccentric means that, you may have a sort of of off-putting aspect to your behavior. It makes it difficult to interact with others at times. Forgetful. So basically this means you need to make a roll when you need to remember something important. You might have impaired senses, which you can take more than once because we obviously have multiple senses, but you can't take that with keen senses. Of course, that would make no sense. You might be impulsive, so you just kind of jump into situations without planning. You can have insatiable curiosity, where you have to know what's going on, and you're always kind of wanting to press the button or open the door or do the thing that might be dangerous, but you just gotta know, and that can be quite fun for role-playing. But you can't take this with unadventurous, which is basically the opposite of that. Obligation could mean that you are part of an organization and you're sort of obligated to, the demands that they may make. If it's a major trait, then the organization is basically so much in control of you that they might, say, put you on call and interrupt your adventure to make you do something else. And basically, if you disobey or if you behave badly, they could have severe consequences. You could be obsessed with something. Quite a lot of villains have that. They're obsessed with tracking down the Doctor or destroying everything or something like that. You might be an outcast. So basically, if people recognize you as an outcast, then you'll suffer a penalty on your social roles. Then we have owing favors to people, which you can again do more than once, because you could of course owe favors to multiple people. And you could have a phobia, which you will get a -2 penalty to any attempt to approach the subject of your phobia. And you can be brave and have a phobia at the same time, which is kind of interesting. So you're brave in most situations, but except for when you see spiders or whatever your phobia is. You can be selfish, you can have slow reflexes, you can be technically inept and have penalties to your tech rolls. You could be unadventurous, so you don't like exploring, you tend to have bad experiences, and you're worried about getting injured or captured or whatever. And there's a lot of explanation about how to deal with this as a GM, which I think is useful. It can be difficult for the player, I think, to imagine, well, if I'm on adventures with the Doctor, how am I unadventurous? So this helps you kind of work out how it's going to manifest in game terms. You could be unattractive, which of course you can't take with the attractive good trait, and basically people think you look hideous and you take penalties to rolls to influence them. You could be unlucky rather than lucky. So basically when you roll 2 6s, which is the best possible roll, you have to re-roll, take whatever the second roll is. So it's more likely to get something worse. You could be wanted by another group. It could be minor if they're just a limited group, or major if they're something very powerful, the Daleks again, or something like that. You could have a weakness. So this could be a weakness to a substance or a particular kind of injury, like it mentions here, being stung by a wasp if you're allergic to it. And weakness is a major trait. They say is best used for villains who need kind of an exploitable weakness characters can use against them. Otherwise, it would be hopeless. And then we have special traits. So this would be things like alien, and this is, they mention, as a gateway trait. So it opens up a bunch of additional traits that humans can't normally get, and you need 2 character points to purchase it. And this allows things like buying certain attributes above level 6. But if you're revealed as an alien, then you might suffer consequences. For example, if you're on Earth, you might be captured by the government, or other alien races might have vendettas against your race or whatever. Alien appearance is a special bad trait, so if you really look crazy, that can have a heavy influence on how people perceive you. Then you can have some pretty cool special stuff under the psychic realm. So if you have the prerequisite of being psychic, there are various powers associated with that. Clairvoyance basically allows you to see what's happening either at quite a long range, all the way up to anywhere on the planet if your resolve is high enough, or you can look at a distance in time. And so you spend a story point and you need to have the psychic trait, and you can look into those locations without actually being there. You can be a cyborg. This way you have cybernetic elements to your character. Basically you have a permanent gadget, and it doesn't run out of power, and you can't lose it because it's part of you. So that could be really useful. Experience you can take multiple times, and this means that you've got more character points and story points, but you reduce your pool of story points. Fear factor is only suitable for villains, so each purchase of the fear factor trait adds +2 to any roll when actively trying to strike fear into people's hearts. Feel the turn of the universe is basically normally only available for Time Lord characters, but a few aliens and even a few humans may potentially have this trait if they've been exposed to the vortex, or if they're kind of slightly mad. And it basically gives you an innate ability to sense when something is amiss or unnatural and what needs to be done to set the universe right. There's a special rank of hypnosis, as I talked about before, where you get complete domination. You could be immortal. You have to be an alien, first of all. You can have a major good trait that means the character never ages and won't die, or a special trait which means you can't be killed. So both of these are pretty unbalancing to the game, so you need to make sure that they're suitable with the GM. You could be inexperienced, which means you get more story points but less character points and skill points. The last of your kind. Precognition, which is another psychic trait, so that gives you the ability to see the future. in the psychic trait in general, so this is the one that you need to buy to access all the subsequent powers. So just psychic itself allows you to see into a target's mind if you do a resolve plus awareness test. So you must be able to see the target, and you get a +4 bonus on the roll from the trait. But if the target doesn't want you in their mind, they can resist with a resolve and ingenuity roll, and both sides can spend story points to kind of beef that up. Psychic also gives +4 when the character attempts to resist having their mind read and to resist possession, which is always very useful. So robot means that you're a robot. Big surprise. You can get attributes above level 6 as if you were an alien, and you can purchase gadget traits. So that means you can have things like force fields or scan, and they're part of your character, and you don't lose them ever, which is pretty awesome. You also don't die from old age, but you may need to sort of replace parts over time. When you take damage, you lose attributes just like a person, but it heals itself over time, either by yourself or by having a suitable technician repairing the damage that you've taken. We got more psychic stuff. We got telekinesis, which is, of course, moving things around with your mind. Basically, it allows you to move things around using resolve instead of strength. Telepathy is always very useful, and it allows you to communicate with a target. They can resist if they don't want to talk to you. And again, the range of your telepathy depends on your resolve. You could be a time agent, in which case you're a special operative of the Time Agency, which is kind of an undercover espionage group. So that means they work for the Time Agency. They have familiarity with 51st century technology, which is tech level 8. And they usually have a vortex manipulator that allows them to communicate, time travel, and interact with computer technology. You may have sort of periodic bits of amnesia in your memory, holes in your memory, because after secretive missions, the Time Agency may erase your memory to preserve the secrecy of what you've done. And you also automatically gain the Vortex trait. Now, the Time Lord, of course, is the rarest and most special trait. It costs 2 character points and 4 story points. So it gives yourself all the abilities of Time Lord. They can regenerate, automatically gain the Code of Conduct, feel the turn of the universe, and Vortex traits, and gain 2 levels of ingenuity, even if this takes the attribute of 6. They also get a gadget and no extra cost, and the game master can decide whether you have a TARDIS or not. Time Lords must have a couple of bad traits, so something like being eccentric, argumentative, or some other things like that. And they mentioned, of course, that there are more rules about being a Time Lord and regeneration and TARDISes in Chapter 4 of this book and the Time Traveler's Companion. You can also be an experienced Time Lord. That means you're older and wiser than a regular Time Lord. Basically, you use up a regeneration on this, but you gain 4 additional skill points and an additional Time Traveler trait for a different time period, so that's pretty useful. You also have Vortex. It's not for real newbie characters, but it adds +2 to any roll that involves piloting a time travel or vortex manipulating device. An additional level of vortex is available with the alien trait and costs 8 points. So that means you can time travel without the need of a ship or device. That's pretty incredible, but you should really only use it for very special NPCs or villains. Then we have some character examples here. So it shows how he decides to spend his character points on different traits, giving himself Boffin, major 2 points, photographic memory, major 2 points, Swordful Pockets, minor 1 point, technically adept, minor 1 point, voice of authority, minor 1 point, and obligation, minor bad, -1 points. Add it all together gives him a total of 6 character points, which is what you would normally spend on traits. You could actually add to that and purchase more bad traits to get more additional points, purchase good traits or skills or attributes as well. So don't forget that. Another useful call-out box here on areas of expertise. So here we're talking about skills. Typically when you make a roll in this game, you'll roll 2d6, you'll add the appropriate attribute and skill, and then you'll add any modifiers from relevant traits, gear, or gadgets, that kind of stuff. But they note here that you can also have certain areas of expertise. So if you get to a skill level of 3 or above, you can opt to select an area of expertise where you excel at the skill. If the GM agrees that your area of expertise applies to the task at hand, you gain a +2 bonus to the roll, which is great. And you can note that on your character sheet as well if you have an area of expertise. So you start out with your 18 skill points, and then we give a list of the different skills. Now we've got athletics, convince, craft, fighting, knowledge, marksman. And then we've got learn skills and instinct as another common call-out box. So there are some instinctual things that you can do. Like dodging is sort of natural reactions and instinct, but blocking and parrying like a martial artist is something that you would learn. Likewise, you have common knowledge as a concept. So certain things you don't need to roll for, especially if you're in your native time era, and it should be common knowledge. If your native era is 2023, you don't need to roll to know what a smartphone is, And medicine, science, subterfuge, which is things like sneaking, lockpicking, sleight of hand, disguise, all that kind of stuff. Survival, which is a useful trait when you're traveling across many different worlds and environments. Technology, generally covering anything technical. Transport, so that means the ability to drive cars or pilot an aircraft or whatever. So it's quite broad again. This game is intended to be more kind of fun and dashing and cinematic. You can have specialisms, be particularly good at aircraft, spaceships, timecraft, whatever. But it's kind of assumed that if you can drive one thing, you can drive other things as well, even if they're different types of vehicles, which I think is kind of cool. Just makes things a bit more fun. Gives you more options, to bring the story along in interesting ways. And then we get into the use of story points. Again, you start with 12 at the maximum, and then you reduce that total based on any particular traits that you've taken, which are usually special traits that reduce your story points. So if you're a Time Lord, you'll subtract 4 and end up with 8. But if you then add some additional special traits, you might lose another 2 or 3 story points along the way. Then, of course, you'll do your finishing touches, the name of the character, the appearance, come up with a background for them, their home time period, and therefore what tech levels they're familiar with, which is important in this game. So tech level 12 is the highest, and that's kind of beyond human comprehension. 11 is the ancient Time Lord level of experience. 10 is Time Lord level. Sort of starfaring Earth level is 22nd to 30th century is tech level 6. Our current tech level is 5, basically late 20th and 21st century Earth. And then prior to that, we're getting into the past all the way back to the Stone Age. And then you should have some personal goals for your character. You'll want to have some equipment and personal items. Now, typically these don't cost anything, but if you want to have a gadget, then you'll need to pay for that as well. And when you get to the equipment chapter, there's rules on that. Again, the book has really beautiful imagery from the 12th Doctor series, as all the Cubicle 7 books have. So here we have the basic rules of the game, basically. So as I mentioned, for most tasks, you're going to roll attribute plus skill plus any trait modifiers plus the result of 2 6-sided dice, and you try to match or beat the difficulty. They give you a nice example here, and then they give you some guidance on which attributes to use for different kinds of rolls, and then a summary difficulty table. So a really, really easy task will be something like a 3. It's barely worth rolling for most people. A normal difficulty would be 12, hard is 18, difficult 21, we go all the way up to nearly impossible at 30, and they give examples for that. So very difficult would be recite a Shakespearean soliloquy without mistakes, or charm your way into the White House. So, both of those would be pretty tough. Then we have the success table. You have different levels of success in this game, which is good. If you get 9+ above the assigned difficulty, then you get a yes and result. So you do what you wanted to do, plus another good thing happens. And if you're in combat and you're attacking someone, then you multiply the damage by 1.5. If the amount above the difficulty that you roll is 4 to 8, then the result is good, so you succeeded, and you did pretty well. Your damage is normal. If the amount of difficulty is only 0 to 3, it's a yes, but. So you did sort of do what you want, but only just. It's kind of a close call. And if you're attacking, your weapon inflicts half the damage and rounding down. So you still hit, but it wasn't a great hit. If you roll below the difficulty by 1 to 3, that's a failure. So that's a no but. So you basically succeeded, but it could have been much worse. For example, if you were rolling to avoid an attack, maybe you were harmed, but you only take half the damage rounded down. And if you were attempting to do something outside of combat, perhaps you failed in the attempt, but you still gained something. If it's below difficulty by 4 to 8, it's a bad result, so that's just a no. If you're taking damage, you get the full damage. If you were trying to do something, you just totally flunked out. And finally, if you were below the difficulty by 9 or more, it's a disastrous failure, and that's a no and. So something, you didn't do what you wanted, and something worse happened as well. And if you're in combat, you take 1.5 times the normal amount of damage. There's an optional rule of a drama die to avoid this calculation, but it's such a simple calculation that I just ignore that rule. Personally, I don't think it really helps much. And you can really remember it very easily with just this short table, which is, of course, will be on any GM reference guide that you'll find for the game. And now we have the story points. They call the success table a ladder, running from disastrous to fantastic. And the story points, if you spend a story point, you move up 1 rung. So if you get a success, you can turn it into a good success. If you get a failure, you can turn it into a success, but it'll cost you a story point. You can also do the reverse. So you can take success and make it a failure to kind of mix things up, and you'll regain a story point. So it's not something you want to do too often and allow too often as the game master, but if it makes sense for the story, if it makes things more fun, then, go for it. You can also cooperate on tasks. So if somebody wants to help you and they have a suitable skill, then they can each help or add +2 to your attempts. The other way is you can take a lot of time to get additional bonuses. So if you take twice as long as you normally take, you get +2 bonus. If you take 3 times as long, add +4, and so on, up to a maximum of +10. However, most of the time in Doctor Who, they're racing against time. So you need to be careful about spending lots of time on a particular task. Conflict through contested rolls. The idea is the same, but both sides work out what they need to roll related to the action that they're competing on. And then the game master will use the antagonist result as a difficulty for the player's rolls. And then you work out whether you were successful or not based on the same measures as on the success table ladder. So basically the difficulty is being set by the opponent and their resistance rather than the flat difficulty number set by the GM. So pretty easy. You can also add some complications if the situation is difficult through the environment or something else like the lighting, and they have examples for that. So if you've got the element of surprise, maybe you get a +2. If there's poor lighting, maybe you get a -1. You can also have multiple opponents potentially opposing you. Choose one of the adversaries to function as the leader for the group and makes the main role, gaining a +2 bonus for each of the troops with them with the appropriate skill. So the same mechanics as doing an assisted roll. They do an assisted roll and that becomes the difficulty. It's a straightforward way to handle it, which I like. Then we have extended conflict. So this is where we get into action rounds and working out what happens in a conflict situation. And again, I really love the way they've handled this in this game. It's very Doctor Who. Each character will decide what they're going to do, and then the turn proceeds in a strict order. So if your action is arguing, using words to try and convince the opponent to back down or change their approach or whatever, you go first. Want to do a movement? Then you will go after the talkers. If you're going to do some kind of action, like, changing a circuit or rewiring a door or something like that, then you'll go next. And finally, last of all, are the fighters. So they're the last people that get to go. So the game mechanically encourages you to seek solutions outside of violence because you will come up first in the initiative order. And that really fits the Doctor Who flavor where fighting is really not something that they want to do. Now, this changes, of course, as we saw in the unit handbook. If you are playing a unit character, then you'll quite often be using weaponry and working more as a military kind of response to threats. But in a typical Doctor Who scenario where you have Time Lord companions, you very rarely see them get into a knockdown, drag-out fight. They might try to talk their way out of the situation, confuse people with their logic or, figuring out what's going on and outsmarting the villains, basically, rather than shooting them or killing them. Or they'll exploit their weakness in some way through technology or ingenuity. So the game's conflict rules reflect that, which I think is great. So we've got all the rules for that, and including how you can make more than one action in a round, things like that. If there's mitigating circumstances, that might change the action order. If you decide you want to perform an action belonging to an earlier phase and you haven't acted yet, you can actually change your mind and jump into that phase. If you're acting simultaneously, you use the highest relevant attribute as a tiebreaker, and then after that, if they're both the same, you would go for the highest skill, and if they're both alike in both ways, then their actions are simultaneous. And they have a nice little summary table here of how things should work for each round, if you like, of extended conflict. So then we have the outcomes of losing the conflict, which could often mean that characters might lose some of their attributes, because that's how damage works in this game. You don't have hit points as such, but you will lose points in relevant attributes. And there's some tips here on making losing exciting. Losing a conflict should be interesting, and you don't want to just be killing off characters left and right. And bear in mind that some enemies like Daleks, they have instant kill disintegration beams. So, you really got to be sort of careful about how you use certain foes and make sure that your players have chances to escape certain death. And they talk about how physical conflict works in that respect. So if you have a numerical value, it tells you how much damage you suffer to your attribute due to the injury. Attribute affected will be determined by the type of attack. So, if you're hypnotized, then it's going to affect your mental attributes in some way. If you're shot by a gun, it's going to affect your physical attributes. And they reflect the damage in these three numbers separated by slashes, which indicate the normal value, the halved value on the left-hand side, and the 1.5 times value on the right side. So you don't have to do the calculations when you have a high success or a lower level success. If it's an S, that means that the target is stunned and knocked unconscious. And if the GM allows, you can still do one last kind of heroic action before you get knocked out, like pressing a button or shouting a warning on the radio or something. And a normal stun lasts for 30 minutes or up to 45 minutes for a disastrous failure. And then L just means lethal. So you just die immediately and are disintegrated. And that's bad. You don't want that. And then they talk about sources of physical injury, and you can actually use this hit location table here to decide which attribute you want to reduce or which could be reduced. You roll 2d6 as usual, and the location will be leg, body, arm, or head. And you'll notice that the list of possible attributes changes based on location. So if you're in the head, you could also get some damage to your mental attributes as well, because, that could lead to brain damage or concussions or whatever else. So you justify that in story terms, and that could lead to interesting role-playing outcomes. And then knockouts as well are often preferable to killing someone. I mean, people often would prefer to capture somebody like the Doctor and exploit them for their information and technology rather than outright kill them, unless you're the Dalek, of course. And then we have a little box set here about different kinds of weapons, from arrows, crossbows, and flintlock pistols, all the way up to Dalek rays, laser rifles, Cyberman particle guns, and you'll see once we get to the lasers and death rays, we're all getting 4/L/L. So yeah, it's not a good situation. At best, you're suffering 4 damage, which is already quite a lot, and in every other case, you're just dying outright. So be careful of that. They mentioned that, combat should be scary, guns should be terrifying, and taking a bullet hit should be bad, and guns will be loud and not something to be messed with. Make sure that you flag up to your players with other ways that they can get around actual physical combat. That could be by planning ahead, sneaking around, talking somebody down, making a distraction, or making the weapons ineffective. If you bring the enemies aboard the TARDIS, for example, the TARDIS itself can shut down weapons through its special field that it creates that deactivates weaponry. It can even deactivate the possibility of brawling with somebody. Or, of course, you'd surrender. You could just dive for cover. So you use your coordination and athletics. You can run for your life. You can shoot back as well. And then there's a nice page of info here about taking cover. So there's different levels of modifiers to hit depending on how much cover you have. If it's 1/3, 2/3, or completely behind cover. And then different amounts of cover can be destroyed depending on what kind of material it's made from. So a concrete wall gives you an effective armor of 15. So you get a lot of armor that basically reduces the amount of damage taken, and then if it takes 70 damage overall, that bit of concrete wall will be destroyed. So cover is not invincible in this game. You can also get armor values from things like SWAT armor, medieval armor, bulletproof vests, that kind of thing, but they don't do much against the Dalek death beams. Then we have lots of coverage with special cases, fire, crashes, falls, drowning, extreme cold and heat, radiation. All these are other ways that you can be damaged, which may well come up because you're traveling throughout time and space. And then we have mental conflict. Fear is something that can actively be a big problem depending on who you're facing. In this case, you would make a resolve plus ingenuity roll, and the character with the fear factor trait that's trying to actively scare the person would use resolve plus presence, and then they would get a modifier to that roll. And if you have traits yourself like cowardly or whatever, or brave, you could modify the roll as well. So it's again an opposed roll kind of situation. So they give you a nice example here where Clara sees something terrifying but hasn't seen her, so she passes the fear check and carries on. Then the teller, the bad thing, sees her and roars at her, so it's trying to intentionally scare her. So now the fear factor comes in and she's frozen in place, basically, by terror. Yeah, then there's rules for being possessed. You can also lose conflicts socially. So this would be, if you're trying to negotiate a treaty with an alien race, trying to use your presence plus your convince against their resolve plus their convince. So I'll give you some examples of that. And then how healing works. A medicine roll can heal an injury, restoring levels of attributes that have been lost. And it depends on your level of success. And if you lose a lot of attribute points during a battle and you have severe wounds, then the game master may decide to give you a bad trait as a result. So watch out for that. Now, the medical aid happening during the action can only be done once for each sort of injury. And then after that, you need to get some other kind of aid. And it says normally at the end of an adventure, any injuries are healed, but there are exceptions. If you're doing like a multi-part story that's kind of continuing over several sessions, then injuries will be kept or only partially healed between sessions. And they give you some outcomes of what happens when you lose all of your particular characteristics. So if you lose all of your awareness, you'll be dazed, you can't interact with your environment properly. If you have 0 coordination, you'll be stumbling and falling over. 0 ingenuity, you won't be able to think sensibly or come up with any ideas. If you have 0 presence, you really can't talk or communicate. If you have 0 resolve, you're basically given up. You just fall to your knees, defeated. If you have 0 strength, you just have no physical strength left in your body. You probably have to be carried away by somebody. You can also die or leave the TARDIS if you don't have any story points to save you, and that'll put an end to the character's journey. Again, with story points at hand, and given the stakes are high, the GM might allow you to, for example, be knocked unconscious or captured instead, or allow another character to spend their story points to push you out of harm's way. But if you have multiple injuries and 3 or more attributes have been reduced to 0, there's a good chance you can be killed. This does happen, right? We've seen companions of the Doctor die in the past, but typically they more often decide to leave the TARDIS through their own choices. Also, if the original character leaves the TARDIS, they could always return at a later time for another adventure. Alternatively, if they do do die in a heroic way, then the GM could give you a bonus for creating a new character to reflect how much you played into the role and offered a appropriate sacrifice for your character. Then we have rules for chases, which can be modified by, of course, your relevant skills, coordination plus athletics or transport, depending on if you're running or using a car. And then you have terrain modifiers as well. And then there's an extended conflict mechanism for resolving chases, where you're focusing on movement. You can also do combat in chases, and you can not do melee combat, but you can shoot at a target, but you will have a -2 penalty because you've already used your action, driving or doing whatever. So you'll be better off trying to bring an end to the chase somehow before you try and do anything weaponry wise. You can also do stunts. So this could be, something to try and give you an advantage in the chase, like driving the wrong way on a motorway. Things that would give you a shortcut and an advantage, but would increase the difficulty. You can also cooperate in a chase. In that case, each character should roll separately. If someone is slow and holding the group up, then they can act as a whole, and the faster characters help the slower ones to escape. And then we got more about story points. So there are a few key ways to spend them. One of the ways to spend them is to say, look, GM, I know there's a mystery here, but I don't know what's going on. I'm stumped. Can you help me out? If you know that a roll is vital, then you can spend a story point to add to the roll. And basically you add an additional 2d6 to the roll. And it's not a guaranteed success, but there's a chance that you could get a huge success with that many additional dice. If you spend more story points, you can add even more six-sided die to the roll as well. So if you spend 3 story points, in the example here, you get 2 extra dice from the first story point, then another 2 from the second 2 story points, meaning that you'd roll 4 extra dice on top of the 2 you normally roll. You can also use the story points, as mentioned before, to improve the result of a roll. So if it's a really essential roll, then you can spend more than 1 story point at a time as well to move multiple rungs up the success ladder. There is an exception though. So if you, for example, have rolled a failure of any kind, you can bump yourself up to success, but no higher. So you can't go from disastrous to fantastic success. That's too much, but you can go up to normal success. But it's also worth bearing in mind that your opponents have story points as well, so they can spend story points to increase their success in a conflict situation. So you might end up in a war of who has the most story points to try and get a roll to succeed. That could be, life or death. So that could be quite exciting. The rules say that character will only really receive an injury when they've run out of story points and can't avoid taking damage, but you can accept the injury, basically gain story points for adding more drama. Each story point that you spend, if you want to kind of recover an injury, you restore half of the attribute levels that have been lost due to injury or losing a conflict. You can also spend story points to do something remarkable. If you do something suitably dramatic, brave, or selfless, that makes a great story. The Game Master will reward you with extra story points that can be used to do dramatic and cool things that make a great story fantastic. Story points can also allow you to bend the plot and manipulate the story. So here's some guidelines for that. So it could be that you want to change the villain's decision about what they're going to do with you to save the group, for example, but you'll need to spend quite a lot of story points to achieve something like that. You can also use story points for gadgets. Gadgets like the sonic screwdriver or the TARDIS have story points. That means that they can do things they're not necessarily designed for. If the sonic screwdriver can do stuff besides just opening doors, can do lots of different things. And the TARDIS is wild with many multitudinous functions, so it has a lot of story points. Story points can also be used to ignore the unskilled penalty for rolling a skill that you have nothing in. So it's limited to basic stuff, but basically you can help another character with basic instructions so that they don't have a penalty on a roll that they need to make to, because maybe everybody else is occupied, but you still need somebody to press a button somewhere in the TARDIS, Players can also donate story points to each other to get through major moments. So that could be through, dramatic speech, kiss, a word of encouragement, something like that. But something dramatic and rousing or encouraging that would then allow you to transfer some of your story points to that person. And then there are various ways to gain story points. So if you do heroic things like going back to save somebody, put yourself in danger to save others, or if you sort of give in and allow yourself to get captured, then the characters can gain a couple of story points to use later, perhaps for their escape. If you play to your weaknesses and remain in character, then you can receive a story point for doing that. So if you have a clumsy bad trait and that leads you to, break something important to make the story more dramatic, then maybe you can get a story point for that. You can also lose story points killing, for example. There'll be times when the characters have to defend themselves, but basically the Doctor doesn't allow killing and believes that it's always the worst possible solution to any problem. He never will use hostile force in that way, and if you do it in the game, and you'll lose some story points. Again, especially if it's killing deliberately in cold blood. And if it was done unnecessarily, especially, then the character will lose all of their story points, and if the other characters had a chance to stop them and didn't, then they'll lose half their story points. This game really doesn't want you to kill people for no reason. And the maximum story points you can have at any point is 12. You may get some more through special traits or, somebody giving you a rousing speech to do a particularly amazing thing at the end of a story, but at the start of the next adventure, you'll have reduced back to 12. And then we have growing of experience. As you go through the game, you won't typically get increases in attributes very often because you don't suddenly get smarter, generally speaking, but attributes can be raised if the story permits it. If you, for example, spend a lot of time with the Doctor, maybe you learn from him and gain some ingenuity, but the GM will have to kind of determine when that's appropriate. Skills you can improve through training over time, and there has to be some kind of rationale behind it. And you could also add areas of expertise if you have an adventure where you spent a lot of time, working on a particular sub area. You can also use your experience to buy off bad traits or buy good traits, which can be really helpful. You can also change your character goals if you want. You could increase your story point pool, but that should only really be used if somebody really deserves a reward for particularly dramatic storytelling. And it could be that the character grows as a person, so they don't change their physical attributes, but maybe they get something like a gadget or an interesting subplot or some more spotlight in the next adventure where they can really shine. So they want to make the point here that you can reward a character and a player by other means than just increasing stuff on the character sheet. And then we get into gadgets. So this is boys and their toys, as they call it. So there are different kinds of equipment. Of course, there are many different technology levels, as we know. The tech level is important to know whether you'll be able to manage the device in question. So Clara here in the example, she is natively at tech level 5, which is modern day Earth. If she wants to try and operate the TARDIS, which is tech level 10, then she gets 5 minus 2 penalties, or minus 10 in total. So it's very unlikely she'll be able to get it to work. Tech level is important. A big tech level difference will make it a lot harder for you to succeed. Vehicles are handled pretty simply. They've just got 3 examples here: motorcycle, car, and truck. They've got a certain amount of armor, a certain number of hits they can take before they blow up, and a maximum speed. And that's basically it. And then we have gadgets. So there are different levels of gadgets. Minor gadgets cost 1 story point and have a minor trait. If they have a major trait, then they'd need a bad trait to kind of balance it out. So it's only 1 story point in total. You can create an item like this with a jiggery-pokery roll with a difficulty of 12 to 18 and about an hour of game time. So major gadgets cost 2 story points and can either have 1 major or 2 minor traits. And again, you can have up to 4 points as long as 2 of those are negative, either 1 major bad or 2 minor bads. Special gadgets, they have 4 story points and hold 4 points worth of traits, 2 major, 4 minor, or whatever other combination, but they're really difficult to make. So the example here would be the sonic screwdriver. It's a major gadget, so it has 4 good traits: open/close, scan, transmit and weld, and 2 bad traits: restriction, deadlock, and restriction complex controls. But it also has 4 story points, so you can use those to do stuff the sonic screwdriver hasn't done before. So jiggery-pokery, this is when you cobble together something sort of on the fly to get something done. Basically, you need the boffin trait for this kind of stuff, and you make an ingenuity plus tech roll. The difficulty will be set according to what kind of gadget you want to create. So special gadgets have 21 plus difficulty, major is 17 to 21, and minor is 12 to 18. And they will take longer as well if you're trying to create a more significant gadget. Then we have gadget traits, so similar to characters, but these are special to gadgets, unless you're a robot, in which case you can take these traits as well. Bigger on the inside, of course the TARDIS has that. You could have a compress trait, so you can make things small. If it's the minor version, you can only make things small. It's a one-way trip. The major version can unshrink as well. Delete means you can remove something from existence, which is pretty harsh. There are ways to restrict that, however. There might be gadgets that can only delete living tissue or delete mechanical stuff, so there's different ways that can go. You can have dimension modifications, so you can make things longer or wider or taller or whatever. Disabling means that you could disable another gadget from working, but it'll only work on one target at a time if it's a minor trait. A major trait means it's more likely to drain the power from every gadget that's nearby. Entrap means you can restrain or entangle or capture something. Force field knocks down damage sustained by 1 level, but if you keep getting hit, then you'll deplete the item's story points, and eventually the force field will become useless. Could be innocuous, which means it looks like something normal normal or harmless, but actually it has crazy alien technology in it, but nobody will notice that. Could be open close like the sonic screwdriver, so you can open locks or unseal things. If used with the subterfuge skill to pick a lock, it gives you a +4 bonus. Locking a door is far easier than opening it, so you get a +6 bonus. Then you have scan, which you can take more than once, so you need to make an awareness roll with suitable skill. So medical for people, technology for scanning tech stuff, and the scan trait gives you a +2 bonus. And if it's specialized scanner, like a medical scanner, then it'll be a +3 bonus, +1 for anything else. You can have a gadget with skills, so it can perform a specific skill task when the user has no ability. So it could be an electronic lockpick, which gives you subterfuge skill, or a pistol with auto aim that gives you marksman, stuff like that. You can have a tracking trait, which allows you to find things. You can have a transmit trait, so you can send out different types of signals, or you can intercept signals, or block signals, stuff like that. Teleportation, that means you can obviously use the gadget to teleport you, usually limited to around 400 kilometers, so you could get from like planet surface to orbit, typically, but you could increase the range with story points. Welding means you could obviously weld stuff together. Zap means that it has a ranged weapon ability, so if it's a minor good, you can do 4/L/L, so a death ray level damage on people, or 4/8/12 on things. As a major good trait, you can hit multiple targets with a single shot, or it can even blast vehicles or spaceships, so super strong. Of course, you have bad gadget traits as well. If it's bulky, then it could be too large for a single person to carry. If it's a one-shot, then you can use it once and once only. Could be restricted, so there are certain kinds of things that the gadget can't do. You know, the sonic screwdriver can open locks, but it doesn't work against deadlock seals. And psychic paper doesn't work against people who have psychic training. You know, it has to be normal folk without psychic training. Gadget could be slow as well, so it takes its time to do what it's doing. It even could be days if it's something really complicated. And then they have gadget story points, and obviously you need to use the story points from the gadget to do something with the gadget. You can't use them as part of your generic pool of story points. And then we've got lots of sample gadgets. So we've got the 2-disc. You can return people from 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional. The 51st century squareness gun, which deletes and restores walls and other items digitally. You can have data pads for scanning things, lockpicks, AI lockpicks, engineer's mate, so it does scan and gives the user technically a depth skill, but it only works on tech. You have memory erasing technology, you have hallucinogenic lipstick, which is River Song's thing, molecular nanoscaler, basically miniaturizes surgeons so they can operate on a patient from within. Quite interesting. Psychic paper, of course, which shows the viewer an apparently blank piece of paper, but it shows the viewer whatever they think they should see. So if they're expecting you to be qualified, they'll see that on the paper. There's a rear view scanner, so it allows you to see invisible creatures, but only through the mirror. A sonic screwdriver, of course, which is common to many of the doctors. And the vortex manipulator, which we've heard about before, which is used by time agents. And it's one of the various types of time vehicles. It's got scan, transmit, teleport, vortex, and restriction to only short temporal jumps. And it's good timing to get into the next chapter, which is all about time travel. This is a nice bit, actually, because here we have some of the stuff that is in the Time Traveler's Companion kind of folded in. So things like time spurs and the Blinvitch limitation effect and stuff like that. And here we have a stat block for the Reapers. If you are creating paradoxes and tears in space and time, then they will come and try to sort of fix it. And they are quite difficult to deal with. They have a strong bite and tail and sting, a lot of story points, 3 to 5, and a number of special capabilities, and they're immune to all weapons. So yeah, run basically. So we go through the basics of how time travel works in the franchise, which we talked about in much greater detail in the video on the Time Traveler's Companion, so I won't spend too much time on it. Even going sideways in time to parallel universes. Then we get into Time Lords, how the special abilities they have, such as being able to control their bodies with great precision, immunity to radiation, the respiratory bypass system, and the regeneration aspect. And then we have the TARDIS, which in many ways is a character of its own. So the TARDIS is the most advanced time machine there is. It can do lots of crazy things when traveling into the vortex of time and space. And then we give it a little bit of history on TARDIS's general systems and abilities, like the architectural configuration circuit, which allows you to create new rooms or remove rooms to boost power or speed when you need to. The chameleon arch allows a Time Lord to change themselves genetically to resemble another species. And the chameleon circuit, which was supposed to allow the TARDIS to disguise itself to fit into wherever it's going, but the Doctor Who's TARDIS is stuck in the shape of a police box from the 1950s. So the chameleon circuit's been broken. And I think at this point he just likes it that way. You can also apply the perception filter and the call out box here for gadgets, so you can buy it more than once, and basically it gives the gadget the face in the crowd trait. You can give it a cumulative +2 bonus for the user's subterfuge rolls. Perception filters get people to ignore their appearance or make them basically invisible. They just, for some reason, their attention just slides right off of you. And we have more details about the TARDIS's internal systems, the HADs, they have harmony, its level of sentience, the shields, telepathic circuits, universal translator, and then we have the TARDIS's stats, which of course are very impressive. It's got its own attributes, all 4s, except for 3 in coordination, but it's got a knowledge of 8, which is massive. Science, +2 in temporal physics, is at 6. Survival at 5. Tech and transport at 4. Got loads of traits. Bigger on the inside, clairvoyance, face in the crowd, fast healing, feel the turn of the universe, force field major, lucky, psychic, 4 levels of scan, sense of direction, telepathy, tough, transmit, vortex, argumentative, impulsive, sourceful pockets, and restriction that it needs tricky controls and normally would have 6 pilots. It has 30 armor, speed of 12 when materialized, 20 story points, and hit capacity just says thousands. I mean, it's basically impossible to destroy it. And of course, special, the Doctor's TARDIS always looks like a police box because the communicating circuit is broke. Then there's some tips on game mastering of the target. Again, the Time Traveler's Companion is the place to look here, really, if you want to get into the details of making time and space jumps and what happens when you make a mistake. Chapter 5, all the strange creatures. So here we have some stat blocks for baddies. Not every enemy is included here, because they did make a separate volume called All the Strange Creatures, which I'll show you in another video, which has stat blocks for basically every enemy in the franchise, essentially. But we do have some cool ones in here. We've got clockwork robots, and we have, of course, Cybermen, who are very tough, very destructive. Not a lot of story points, though, but they do have major armor, reduces damage by 10, and a strength of 7. They can fly, they've got fear factor 3, they've got 2 natural weapons, electric grip and particle beam, just as lethal as a Daleks beam. They're networked, so they have a hive mind, and they have short bursts of lightning speed, so pretty tough. And then we got the horrible Daleks, of course. Strength of 7, technology and medicine and science are at 8, so they're very high level. They got armor major, they can survive in any environment. Fear factor of 4, they can fly, so they can hover at speed 1, or in open skies that are space, they have a speed of 6. They have a major force field, so they reduce damage by 2 levels. And they have the exterminator weapon, which kills normally with a single shot. They can scan, they can self-destruct, damaging people within a 10-meter area of the explosion. They're great with tech, and of course they are time travelers, so they have vortex skill. And they can have 5 to 8 story points as well, so really not very pleasant. Then we got Dalek mutants. Without their Dalekanium casing, they have very limited movement, and they don't usually survive very long. They still have things like high fear factor and certain immunities and stuff, but they are much, much weaker than the Dalek in its metal casing. Dalek antibodies. So basically these detect any intruding organic material and dump it out of the Dalek's body. We've got Dalek sleeper agents, which are pretty scary. Person that appears to be normal, but when they're triggered, an eye stalk emerges from their head and a gun stick from their hand, and they serve the Daleks. They'll have the same abilities and skills as the converted character, but they will have added traits. So they get an eye stalk, alien senses through that eye stalk, the enslaved to the Daleks trait, natural weapon through the exterminator hand. They'll be networked, and they'll have the ability to do a minor shapeshift, so they can, hide their Dalekness when they need to. Then we've got a major antagonist here in the form of Missy, who is an adversary of the Doctor. Of course, she's got the Time Lord and the Time Lord experience traits, and Time Traveler Special, which means she's familiar with all tech levels, and she is Vortex born, so may re-roll a failed test involving time or time travel. So, and Ingenuity 10, which is even higher than the Doctor himself, so be careful. We've got the Boneless, again from Series 12. They're 2-dimensional beings, and they look quite wrong in 3 dimensions. They're real bad, because if they touch you, you instantly get killed and flattened into 2 dimensions. And it can become abstract painting or a photograph or something like that. The victim dies immediately. The Doctor did invent the device, however, the 2 discs, to bring them back. So, not a permanent death, assuming you can create one of those in the time of need. We've got the Teller, which is mentioned in an earlier example with Clara about fear factor. So he's got fear factor of 1, also just a +2 on rolls to scare or intimidate. But he does have alien senses and psychic abilities, and it is controlled by the Bank of Karabraxos. It can devour your mind without even a roll. So the victim's awareness, ingenuity, presence, and resolve attributes simply start losing 1 point each turn until they're all at 0. It can also directly contact and sift through someone's mind, looking for evidence of criminal intent through an opposed ingenuity plus resolve roll. And has 5 story points as well. So
So pretty scary that it can wipe your mind. It's not great. We've got robot knights as well. So they have knightly armor, reducing damage by 4. Diligently follow commands, so they have by the book as a trait. They have a disintegrator ray from the slit in their helmets, but the disintegration ray does not affect metal surfaces. It can actually reflect back at the robot and destroy itself. It also has a sword, which does a lot of physical damage. Now we have the Silurians. There's Madame Vastra. Silurians in general, they've got a lot of strength at 4 and generally pretty good stats. Fighting 3, knowledge 3, marksman 2. They have minor armor, which reduces all damage by 5 because they've got tough lizard skin with scales. They can climb, they can deal with extreme heat, and they have a tongue which can shoot out from its mouth up to 1 meter and inject poison into people. The infected person has to make a strength or resolve check once every hour to avoid mutation or death. Great. They also have a gun, Silurian gun, which has a lethal setting, 4/L/L, or has a stun setting where it fires a cloud of gas that can incapacitate you. And then there are the Sea Devils, who used to work with the Silurians. They hibernated underwater. They have a certain fear factor to them, too, in fact. They can live underwater. Their scales reduce injury by 5 levels, like Silurians. They have different values of coordination for land and water, vastly different. So they got coordination 5 underwater, so best to face them on the land if you can. And they have a weakness to high-frequency sound. Bombard them with that, they can only move at very slow speed. Sea Devil gun, which does 4/L/L and can burn through walls and doors, even those made of thick metal. Plus they've got 4 story points. The Skovox Blitzer, which is a war machine, so it's got military-grade armor of 10, works by the book, rigidly follows orders. It relies on visual identification to find targets, though, so if you're invisible, you can escape. It can scan to detect energy sources, and it has enough explosives to destroy an entire planet. So that could be devastating. And it also has a self-destruct protocol, and that also has devastating consequences for the planet. And its weapons include a lethal blaster, a machine gun, and lethal explosives. So yeah, not to be messed with. Then we got the Sontarans, tough little guys with big weird bullet heads. We know they can be good as well. You know, one of them is part of the investigations group in the Victorian London in the series. General Sontaran Trooper will have high strength and resolve at 6 each, plus a good deal of presence and ingenuity. Fighting is at 5, marksman is at 5, and survival is at 4. I mean, they're warriors down to the bone. They've been at war with the Rutan for thousands of years. They have +2 bonus to resolve thanks to Brave. They never disobey an order from superior officer. They reduce damage to all attributes by 2, but they do have a weakness in the probic vent on the back of their necks. But there's a -4 penalty to aim at that. But a single hit on that vent will disable the trooper and stun them. But they carry a Sontaran rifle, which is 4/L/L, and a shock staff, which does all S's, so straight up stuns you. They also have body armor that reduces damage taken by 5. Then we got spider germs, which protect the giant creature in the moon. They're badger-sized spiders with bright red leg joints. Got no ingenuity. They are basically macro-sized immune system, if you like. But they have alien senses, +4 to relevant awareness rolls. They can climb. They don't have good vision. They use motion detection instead, but they do have sharp fangs. They're also weak to sunlight, and they're highly vulnerable to chemicals that take out bacteria, and they only have 1 story point. But you'll probably face a lot of them. You've got the terrifying Weeping Angels, who are quantum locked, so as long as you don't blink, then they can't get any closer to you. They are frozen as stone statues, but if you do blink, then they can incredibly quickly, and that's reflected in their stats as well. So when quantum locked, basically, any damage they take is reduced by 15. They're really tough. They're timeless and eternal. They can regenerate any physical damage they've sustained, but it could take a long time depending on how much damage that is. They have teeth and claw attacks with +2 to strength on their attacks, damage 257. They have the special ability Don't Blink, so they move at incredible speeds as long as they're unobserved and may act once in every phase, doing and attacking all in the same round. Alternatively, they may forgo the first 3 phases in order to rend the victim to shreds, attacking 4 times in 1 round. So an angel at full strength moves like the wind, but as it weakens from hunger or damage, it will slow down. So an angel's speed is equal to their current story point total. They can also infect people or things. Anything that can record its image can become another angel. So if a living being stares into the eyes of an angel for long enough, then you make an opposed roll, and the angel will infect them, and they'll gradually become an angel themselves. Likewise, the angels can be copied into a visual image. That image will then become an angel, given long enough. They can also interrupt electricity, which enables them to shut the lights off, meaning that they are forcing blinking upon you, basically, by making themselves invisible, and they can move super fast during that time the lights are blinked off. And they also can temporarily exile people, so they consume potential temporal energy by ripping living beings out of their timeline and throwing them backwards. If the angel is striking to feed and lands a successful physical attack, the victim is thrown back in time a number of years equal to the roll of 2 dice multiplied by 10 per level of success. Then they gain 1 story point for every level of success it scores, up to a maximum of 9 story points. They're really tough opponents. They start with 6 to 8 story points, and then they can feed, send you back in time, and gain a hell of a lot more story points, making them really tough to get rid of. Then we have some hot tips on aliens as player characters, including our friend Strax as an example of good villains. Not all alien species are evil or bad, so, they might be perceived a certain way, but that doesn't mean that every individual is that way. Then we have alien traits, but also it mentions that you can create major and minor traits to fit if you want to create your own species. So you can have stuff like additional limbs, alien senses, which there's various variations for that. Armor, you can have minor armor, which reduces injury by 5 levels, and as a major trait reduces by 10, and as a special trait, you get armor 15 and -2 coordination. You can have climbing, environmental resistances. If it's a major good trait, you can travel in any environment. So that is things like the Daleks that are basically invulnerable wherever they go. Fear factor, we've already talked about. Flight, of course, means you can fly, and their speed will be half the coordination rounded down as a minor trait. As a major good trait, you're a proper flyer, so your speed is 3 times your coordination above 100 meters. You can fly as high as they like, but there might be some obstacles imposed on that, for example, if they can't survive in vacuum. And of course, aliens can have gadgets as well, which we purchase normally. They can have immunity to certain types of weapons, and many aliens are immune to some type of form or other. They could be impervious, so they're not immune, but they are resistant to damage from one type of weapon. So if they get hit by, say, a gun and they're impervious to bullets, you shift the damage result down by 1 step before applying any other abilities. You'll always get a minimum of 1 damage, though. Some aliens can also do infectious things like the weeping angels. Some creatures will have natural weapons like toxic breath or, poisonous claws or sharp teeth or what have you. A minor trait will be close combat only. A major trait will be shooting something. So some kind of ranged weapon. Networked means that if it's a minor trait, the aliens know where each other are, but they can't really talk to each other. As a major trait, they basically have a telepathy trait connected them to each other. So it's like the Cybermen. They can communicate with each other over any distance, essentially. Well, you could use the telepathy psychic trait as a guide to the distance. You can have possession, so that's the highest possible level of hypnosis, basically. The opponent will have the opportunity to resist. The alien will have to leave its host body somewhere to possess you, but could be very hard going to be possessed by an alien, and they can do whatever they like with you. The alien can also have replication, meaning it can multiply itself. Could have resistance. You can have the damage or effects from a single element or force of damage. And then there's modifiers here as well for being tiny or huge. So there's a nice little table of modifier to effective strength, speed, to be hit or to be seen, depending on being tiny major, tiny minor, human, huge minor, or huge major. So that's pretty useful. Shapeshifting is available as well. So a minor good trait means that you can disguise yourself as a fairly convincing member of another race. If it's a major good trait, then you can physically shapeshift into something completely different, and it's not possible to really tell by basic physical examination that the alien is shapeshifted. You can have something totally special, like the quantum-locked abilities of the Weeping Angels, for example. They could have natural teleportation abilities or through a gadget. And of course, they can have vortex if they're time travelers. Alien appearance is a negative alien trait that will make people notice you and give you a penalty to social roles. You could also be enslaved. So basically, you may have been enslaved in the recent past or still under the control of some other race, which will give you various problems trying to voice your opinion, and you'll have a generally submissive attitude. And now we get into how to run the game. So dealing with things like not cheating with the dice, trying not to metagame where you know things out of character, but your character wouldn't know them. So don't use those to inform your actions in the game. Make sure that you give your character an actual character and try to follow through on that. Make sure you get involved in the game, in the scene, and try to help. Don't be awkward. Create a character that works well with the other characters, and don't hog the spotlight, even if you're the Doctor. So they say a good way to keep yourself on track is just to think, what would the Doctor do? Try to think like them. They would be selfless and brave and try to get people out of danger, even if it's a risky thing to do, and they would focus more on the needs of the many rather than their own needs. And then they give you some hints and tips on recurring themes of the series that you could explore in the game. General sense of adventure, facing the good and bad and the ugly, both in the villains and in humans and in the characters themselves. Curiosity, trying to answer weird questions. Why is Clara the impossible girl? These are things we want to know. The indomitability of the human race, a recurring theme that humans are rough around the edges, but they keep trying. They keep trying to get better, which is not something that all races around the galaxy have. Making a difference to people, that's something that the Doctor always wants to do. And also pacifism. So as kind of hard-coded into the game, fighting should be a last resort, and killing should absolutely be a terrible thing that you don't want to do. Then we have some game mastering tips, who should be game master, because, it's not something everybody wants to do. It's a lot of responsibility. I enjoy it. Other people enjoy it. But, players complain a lot, and it can be hard to sit there and listen to that, or have players cutting in saying, oh, you did that wrong, and you forgot this, But just if you're a player, treat your game master like a friend. They're taking on a lot of responsibility to create fun for the whole table, so make sure that you acknowledge that responsibility that they hold and be supportive. And there's some good game mastering hints and tips as well, so don't railroad the players, don't try to kill off people intentionally, be fair, improvise when you need to, because your players are always going to do stuff you don't expect. Try to avoid cliches, that kind of stuff. And then, there's some tips on bringing NPCs to life, bringing the setting to life, creating a good atmosphere in the game. Using technobabble, they got some good words to throw in. Dealing with problem players is useful. Most games don't cover this, but they really should. The power gamer is, I think not necessarily a problem, but if people are just focusing on winning to the exclusion of creating dramatic stories, which is definitely what this game is trying to do, then you just want to manage that a little bit. Metagaming, again, as we mentioned before, is just acting on information that your character doesn't have, which you shouldn't do. If somebody's too quiet, try and find a way to bring them into the spotlight a little bit, not in an uncomfortable way, but just, allow their character to shine a bit more and come up with challenges that really need them to work. The rule monger, which is what they call the rules lawyer. As the GM, you have the right to break rules if you want to, and the players can think that it was a bad ruling, or, you could be a little lenient and they might not like that, something like that, but you don't need to be questioning their authority in that sense. The GM is presumably making a decision on a ruling because they think that's going to make the adventure proceed in a more sensible way. If you do make a mistake, just admit it, say, well, I'll make it up to you by doing blah, blah, blah. And your player should understand that. Likewise, if your player makes a mistake, then as long as they admit to it and say that they'll make it right, then just move on. And then we have some final tricks and tips for the game master, but basically the rules of the game are really simple. At any point, basically just attribute plus skill plus trait modifiers plus 2 dice, beat a difficulty. Just, use that, improvise, and you can get through an awful lot without having to worry too much about the details. And then we get some nice hints and tips about building stories, which again is really helpful. Doctor Who is a great line for people new to role-playing, and this book, bringing it all together into a nice hardcover, I think, it makes it great to have on the shelf as a reference for new GMs, and it works for, these kind of tips work for any story, not just Doctor Who, What are the components of a good story? Setting up a conflict, having a good antagonist, giving them some complexity to their motives. They're not just bad because they're mindless eating machines, but they have a reason that they want to do something terrible, and it should be understandable to a degree. That's what makes the best villain. The setting should be interesting. Not just, we're in London doing a thing and it's, last week. This is a time travel game, so get crazy with it. And then setting up good action. Chase scenes, combat scenes that players can use their ingenuity to get out of, setting up situations that players will, by the mere fact of being players, find an interesting way out of. That, I think, is one of the great things and tips that apply to any sort of game like this where narrative drama is a big focus. You don't have to prep scenes in great detail and, say, well, this Cyberman will be exactly here and this is what I want to happen. Just create interesting situations that tie together thematically and story-wise and let the players do their thing. And interesting things will emerge. And that's one of the beautiful aspects of role-playing games, is that the rules plus the players plus the GM setup can equal really memorable moments that you never saw coming. So I would say any kind of game in this rough area where narrative is a big focus benefits from that kind of approach. This game is very GM centric. It's not a very modern narrative game where you've got huge amounts of player agency, but the players can change the narrative with story points. That's a really important part of the game and something that you really need to take account of as the GM. So I do consider it a narrative game myself because of that. Then they even give hints and tips on having a good climax and aftermath, and then doing 2 and 3 part stories, using cliffhangers effectively. I love doing that. It's one of my favorite things to do. And setting up campaigns. So doing like a series as you would see on the show, having a storyline that continues on in the background through various adventures, doing big finales at the end of a campaign, or even doing like one-off specials where it's an epic story with pre-gen characters for a special occasion like a Christmas game or whatever. Then In Chapter 8 here, we have the start of our adventures. So I won't spoil these, but there are 2 adventures here to get you started. And you can see that we've got some, stat blocks for key NPCs and enemies. We've got all the scenes are nicely laid out, explained with bullet points. You can use these even at the table, just kind of flicking through the bullet points and coming up with a description on the fly. There's ways that they advise you on how to turn this into an ongoing campaign, various questions that characters might get answered. Then we have the Seeing Eyes adventure, which was sort of started in the sample of play at the beginning of the book, and now it's here in the second adventure. So they're both pretty good introductory adventures, not difficult to run, but there are all the key elements of a fun session or a couple of sessions, depending on how fast your group is. You will get time travel, you will get crazy stuff happening. And then at the end, we have our pre-generated characters. So we have, of course, the Doctor. So this is Doctor number 12, played by Peter Capaldi. He's got Awareness 4, Coordination 5, Ingenuity 9, Presence 4, Resolve 5, Strength 3. He's got a billion traits that I'm not even going to bother to list, including Experience Time Lord times 12. He's got a Sonic Screwdriver, a Spoon for dueling, Psychic Paper, and the TARDIS. And then we got loads about his personal goals, personality, and background. For his skills, he's better at things like science, convince. He's actually pretty good at fighting. Got a 6 in knowledge, 5 in tech, and a 4 in transport. As he's getting through more regenerations, he's, getting better and more experienced at lots of things. But he's only got 8 story points. You can see there on the top. Which is below the maximum due to the Time Lord traits. Clara, of course, we know her as the Impossible Girl, and she makes her first appearance in the 11th Doctor's era, and then she has to get adjusted to the new style of Doctor number 12. She has 12 story points as a normal person. She's pretty good with Ingenuity and Resolve at 4, and she got 3s and 2s elsewhere. She's got Attractive, Brave, Friends, Major, the Doctor, of course. She's lucky. She got some psychic training, and technically adept. She's also eccentric, control freak, which she denies, insatiable curiosity, and she's obliged in a major way to the Coal Hill School because she's a teacher. Skills-wise, she's good at subterfuge, convincing, a little bit of fighting. She's got knowledge with a history specialization, tech with a computer specialization. She's okay at transport as well. Then we have Danny Pink. He again has 12 full story points. He's got pretty good stats. 4s across the board, essentially. But his skills are a mixed bag. He's got 0 in craft, subterfuge, and medicine. But he's got some abilities elsewhere. But he's a bit more of a regular guy. And he's got Attractive, Brave, Sense of Direction, Tough, and Voice of Authority as positive traits. But he's also got a Minor Code of Conduct, Dark Secret, which is that he accidentally shot a child. Not a great thing. And he's got an obligation to the school, and he's unadventurous, so these are all negative traits. Then we have our friends from Paternoster Investigations. So we have Madame Vostra. She's a Silurian. She's got 6 story points, because she's got quite a few useful traits here that reduce overall story points, but she still has a 5 in Ingenuity, 4s in everything else. She's got a great ability at fighting, subterfuge, and disguise. She's quite good. And Marksman, and a +2 with her tongue, which is her inbuilt special attack, which is mentioned down here. She's also an alien. She's got minor armor, all the traits of a Silurian. Plus she's got a friendship with the Doctor, friendship with the Paternoster gang, major friendship with Scotland Yard, quick reflexes, and telepathy, but only with Jenny, who is her partner. We've got negatives, though, of an alien appearance, code of conduct. Her dark secret is that she eats people. She's a dinosaur person. What can you do? Last of her kind. There's no more Silurians left, and she has a weakness to cold. And she also has a katana, along with a mask or veil to cover her alien appearance. Then we have Jenny Flint. So she is the partner of Madame Vostra. She has pretty good stats, 5 in Resolve, and 4 in Ingenuity and Coordination, and 3s elsewhere. She's got a lot of good traits: Brave, Empathic, Friends with the Doctor, Friends with Paternoster Gang, Telepathy with Vostra, and Keen Senses for all senses. Plus she's got a leather fighting uniform with Armor 1. She's got a sword and a scanner glove. It's just a minor gadget, but it can be useful. Skills-wise, she's good at subterfuge and fighting, but not so good with marksmanship and technology and so forth. Then we have our good friend Strax. He's a bit of a dummy. Ingenuity of 3, awareness of 3, but his coordination, presence, are decent at 4, and resolve and strength are excellent at 6. He's got some good traits. He's alien, he's brave, he's friends with the Doctor, friends with the Paternoster gang. He's also tough, but he's got a lot of negatives. He's got an alien appearance, of course. He's very by the book because he's Centauran. He's eccentric. He's got an obligation to the Doctor, and he's got the probic vent vulnerability, so a hit to the vent on the back of his neck will stun him instantly. And he's got a major weakness to coronic acid, but he also has a Centauran rifle, which is very deadly, the shock staff, battle armor, and a a medical scanner, which is really useful. He has no crafting abilities whatsoever. Pretty mediocre, basically, except for the fighting stuff. So he's got great fighting, great survival, great marksmanship, and decent knowledge, technology, and transport as well. Pretty versatile guy, but you don't want him at the front of a sort of intellectual mystery. Then we have Kate Stewart from Unit. She's a human, so she's got 12 story points. She has pretty rough awareness, coordination, and strength at 2, but good ingenuity, presence, and resolve at 4 each. She's got no fighting, no craft, a lot of 1s in her skills basically, except for science and tech at 4. Convince and knowledge are at 3. But she is brave. She's friends with Unit Major, friends with Doctor Major, indomitable, technically adept, and she has the voice of authority, but she does go by the book, and she's of course obliged to Unit. She has to defend them as the leader. Then we have Osgood. So again, a human with 12 story points. She's got 6 ingenuity, so she's very clever, but she does have great awareness and some resolve. She's boffin, so she can make gadgets and stuff, which is useful. She knows how to run, which is useful, and she's technically adept. She's friends with Unit. But she's also clumsy. She has a dependency on her asthma inhaler. She looks distinctive, so she stands out in a crowd. She's got impaired senses, so she needs glasses. She's obliged to the Unit, and she's obsessed with the Doctor. So personal goal is just to travel in the TARDIS. She's like obsessed with the Doctor. And you can see she wears the 4th Doctor's scarf, much like my friend that I've mentioned before. And we've got Cybra. She has 12 story points as well as a human. She's got great awareness at 5 and 3 as everywhere else. She's empathic, friends minor with the Doctor and Clara. She can shapeshift in a major way, and she's great at convincing people with a 5 there. She's good at knowledge and subterfuge with a 3 in each of those. She has a hologram shell, which allows the shapeshift trait, basically. But it's only got 1 story point. So then we have Psy. So he's got 4 in awareness and ingenuity, 3 everywhere else. No fighting skill, no survival skill, but great with tech at 4 plus 2 for computers. And everything else is, and subterfuge as well, but everything else is pretty bad. He's a cyborg. He's minor friends with the Doctor and Clara. Keen senses. He can open and close things. Photographic memory, quick reactions, technical adept, but he also has a dark secret of a criminal record, and he's got a weakness, whereas an occasional drive glitch might forget stuff. Then we have Courtney Woods. So we've got a young student here, so she gets the inexperienced trait, gets an extra 3 story points, gives her 15. So can do a lot of lucky things. She's empathic, facing the crowd, indomitable, she's owed a favor by the Doctor. She can run for her life, and she's a screamer, but she's also argumentative, inexperienced, has insatiable curiosity. She's still in school, which is an obligation, and she gets space and travel sickness. But stats are not too bad. 3s except for resolve and strength, which are 2, but she's just a kid, you know. She doesn't have any stuff. Skills are not great. Got a couple of 0s in there. Really no contribution to fighting, but she can do a little bit of convincing and a bit of subterfuge. Then we've got Rigsy. He's not a school student, so we're back to 12 story points. He's got 4s in awareness, coordination, and ingenuity. 3s elsewhere. He's got a 4 in craft with a +2 for street art, which is pretty cool. 3 in subterfuge, everything else mediocre or 0. He's got the traits charming, facing the crowd, and sense of direction, which are all pretty useful, but he has an obligation to perform community service. So then we got Robin Hood. So quite a few interesting characters here that are set up for your use. Got a 5 in coordination, which is great. 4 in presence and strength, so he's very charismatic and quite strong. He's also brave, charming, has keen senses of sight, quick reflexes, and the voice of authority, but he's got an adversary in the form of the Sheriff of Nottingham, and he's impulsive. And he does have weapons, though, the longbow and the sword. He's a 5 marksman, which is fantastic, and 3 fighting, so he's pretty good with his weapons as well. Then we have Journey Blue, so she is a human again with 12 story points. She is excellent at transport and athletics and decent at fighting and marksman. She's got a laser pistol, which is pretty damaging, and she's a soldier in the resistance against the Daleks. So she's brave. She's got friends major with the combined galactic resistance. She's got quick reflexes and tough, but of course her adversary is the Daleks, and she can be argumentative. Then we have our generic stat sheets. So we've seen these before, you know, the unit soldier, the scientist, rock star, you know, going charisma based kind of adventuring archaeologist if you want to be Indiana Jones effectively. And then a blank character sheet to fill in as you like, and then a summary of the basic rules. And this is a really nice page to, you know, print out of the PDF and sort of give that to everybody so that they know, you know, how to use story points, levels of success, the basic rule for everything, the rules for conflict, extended actions. And then we're into the index. So that is what I call version 1.5 of the Doctor Who role-playing game. Really, it's the 12th Doctor edition, but like I said, the limited edition is actually for the 10th and 11th Doctors, and as soon as that gets to me, which once again I've had to order from another country despite it originating in the UK, which is always very funny to me, I will show that off as well, just very briefly. I've given this a bit more detail than I originally planned to, mostly because some people might prefer to watch this to learn about the original version of the game rather than look at the older box sets, depending on what they prefer to buy. Hopefully this will be useful for somebody if you're looking to get into the first edition of the game. I think this is the more practical package than getting a box set, which will often be, can be beat up or used components, and the softbacks inside are wonderful, but they won't last as long. There's also some additional and better organized and better presented information in the hardback version. So I would recommend this version if you don't want to go to 2E. And we will talk about 2E, which I have mixed feelings about. So I actually recommend this version over the current version, if you like. But more on that to come in future videos. In the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen. Please do leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more RPG stuff. I'm mixing up the Doctor Who content with other stuff because it seems like some people don't care as much about Doctor Who as I do, maybe, but it is a big deal over here, the country where I live, and the game has been around for many years, supported by the same company. So it is actually a long-running, really well-supported property that's really fun to game in because time travel is wacky and weird and stupid and fun. So I do recommend giving it a look, even if you don't think it's normally in your wheelhouse. But in any case, let me know in the comments if you played the game in its different variations. Which one do you prefer? Let me know if I missed out anything or said anything stupid, and I'll try to correct it in the description. And in the meantime, I hope to see you in the comment section and in future videos. So take care and go enjoy the 60th anniversary of Doctor Who, especially on Christmas Day. Take care and bye-bye.